All right. Welcome, everyone. We're going to call to order the Budget Committee meeting for May 8th, 2023. And we are going to start with a roll call of Budget Committee members. So Budget Committee members answer with present when I call your name. And that includes school board members and Budget Committee members. We're all together, the Budget Committee. Zone 1, Susan Greenberg.
Present.
Zone 1, Jason Hohenbaum.
Present.
Zone 2, Kalen Perez.
Presente.
Zone 2, Farah Mahmoud. Okay. Zone 3, Eric Simpson.
Present.
Zone 3, Diane McCartney.
Present.
Zone 4, Sunita Garg.
Present.
Zone 4, Alok Mehrotra. Okay. Zone 5, Ugana Ananaya.
Present.
Zone 5, Krista Billings. Zone 6, Becky Timchuk.
Here.
And Zone 6, Heidi Edwards.
Present.
Zone 7, Tom Collette, I am here. And Zone 7, Lisa Schultz.
Present.
All right, excellent. So the first item on our agenda tonight is going to be the election of the Budget Committee Chair. Do I hear a motion to elect a Budget Committee Chair? Becky.
I nominate Heidi Edwards. It is my privilege to nominate Heidi Edwards. When I was elected to the school board 8 years ago, one of my first decisions was to pick a budget member, and that was meeting Heidi for the first time, and she's been here with us all 8 years, and she has served as vice chair and chair last year, and I think she's very involved in the community and will do an excellent job of being the leader of our budget committee.
I hear a second? Susan Greenberg, second it. All right, any discussion before we take a vote on the Budget Committee Chair? Excellent. All right, board members answer with aye, nay, or abstain when I call your name. Susan Greenberg.
Aye.
Jason Hohenbaum.
Aye.
Karen Perez.
Aye.
Eric Simpson. Aye. Diane McCartney. Aye. Sunita Garg.
Aye.
Ugana Ananaya.
Aye.
Becky Timchuk.
Aye.
Heidi Edwards.
Aye.
Tom Collette, an enthusiastic aye. Lisa Schultz.
Aye.
And the motion passes unanimously, and I'm now going to hand this gavel over to our new Budget Committee Chair, Heidi Edwards.
Thank you for the nomination. I'm happy to serve as your chair this year for the Budget Committee. And I do see that Krista Billings has joined us and Alok as well, our two Budget Committee members. So welcome. We're going to move to the next agenda item, which is to elect our Vice Budget Chair. So we'll open it up for nominations. Susan?
I nominate Jason Hohenbaum as vice chair.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any discussion? No discussion. We'll move to aye or nay or abstain. I'll just read names. Susan Greenberg.
Aye.
Jason Hohenbaum.
Aye.
Karen Perez.
Aye.
Farah Mahmoud. Eric Simpson.
Aye.
Diane McCartney.
Aye.
Sunita Garg.
Aye.
Alok Mehrotra. I see you said aye. Ugana.
Aye.
Krista Billings.
Aye.
Becky Timchuk.
Aye.
Myself, an enthusiastic aye. Tom Collette.
Another enthusiastic aye.
And Lisa Schultz.
Aye.
Great. Congratulations, Jason, for being our vice chair this year, this budget season. Next on the agenda, we have our budget message from Dr. Gus Balderas, Superintendent of Beaverton School.
So thank you, Lisa, and thank you for taking the leadership role here. And I'll be brief since we have all this covered here later on in our presentation, but wanted to the budget committee to know that this budget was developed with our best thinking and trying to meet the needs of our kids and our staff with the known financial numbers that we have right now. And as well as gather with input from staff, community, and students through the strategic planning process or integrated guidance process, through many community meetings or many meetings with our administrative team, as well as budget listening and learning sessions. We're very fortunate here to have a healthy reserve to be able to offset some of the budget for the out years, but we do have some concerns here with decline enrollment, and I know you're going to go through that tonight, Mike, as well as ESSER dollars disappearing in 2024, which is next year, and these are federal dollars that have helped guide us through COVID, and we're still not out of COVID. I mean, we're still seeing the lasting effects of COVID with our students in our buildings, but we do have a tighter budget coming forward. You know, right now the co-chairs and governor's budget is at $9.9 billion current service level, meaning that how we do business right now is not at 9.9, it's probably about 10.3. And we're building a budget at 10.1 because of those healthy reserves that this budget committee and previous administration have developed. And we've developed great programs in this district to support our kids and staff. And these past few years, these programs have been really, really essential, and they're essential now. But these programs will be difficult to continue off this current budget forecast. Actually, they're impossible to continue off this current budget forecast at 9.9. We need more money. You know, we need to continue to lobby Salem for what we need. You know, this fabled quality education model that's $11.9 billion, which is a quality education model, and it's, you know, I was here when Measure 5 hit. I was actually a reduction in force in Hillsborough back then, and it seems like my whole career in Oregon has been struggling with budget, and we're still there. This fabled $11.9 billion is what we need to keep our services going that our kids need and want, and our community need and want. But again, we are fortunate right now to have some reserves to build the budget at 10.1. So even if we don't get there to the 10.3, we do have those healthy reserves that this budget committee and previous administrations have put together. But knowing full well that we are just kicking the can, meaning that we are deferring the issues into a later date, because there will be reductions. There will be reductions. There are reductions this year. There'll be more reductions next year until we get to a certain number. And I think this gives us time and opportunity to be able to sit back with the administration, with our staff, to figure out what is the best model for certain programs. Because we built great programs that are not sustainable. And that's not fair to our kids, it's not fair to our staff, it's not fair to our community. But these are tough times for all. If you read the paper, read any newspaper in Oregon, any district, this is what they're facing. And but we're doing the best we can with the resources we have, and we're very, very fortunate to have, again, the board and the administration and the budget committee really have some healthy reserves for us to be able to offset compared to other districts that do not. Because you're going to, right now, you see districts that do not have these healthy reserves, and they're going through some pretty dramatic reductions right now across the way. These are local districts. So again, look forward to this presentation tonight. Don't want to be doom and gloom here because we are doing some wonderful things with the budget we do have. And I think the one thing that is the backbone to our district are our staff. And we have outstanding faculty out in buildings, and we have outstanding administrators overseeing our schools, and that's something that we're really, really proud of, and the programs that we will develop are going to be sustainable. These are some things that we are really, that's our core mission, is to develop, anything that we develop has to be sustained. Because if it's not sustained, why do we do it to begin with? I think that's an ask that we need to have, you know, including our wonderful preschool programs that this board and this budget committee has funded, but our multilingual programs for our kids. You know, 109 languages are spoken in our district, 109 languages. It went up, so just check that, 109 languages. And that's incredible. And we're going to continue to do what we can to meet the needs and use our kids' assets as resources for them in our public schools. But again, I look forward to the budget presentation that staff will give tonight and be able to answer any board questions. So turn it over to our budget chair.
Thank you, Dr. Balderas. Next up on our agenda is the budget proposal presentation. We will start that with Michael Schofield, Associate Superintendent of Business Services, and Jessica Jones, Budget Manager.
Thank you, Chair Edwards. Appreciate the time. It's great to see you live and in person this year. This will be my first live and in-person budget presentation before the board. COVID started shortly after I arrived. But I am an old hat at this. I've been around a long time, so happy to see y'all today. And what we're really going to try to do is walk you through kind of roles and responsibilities, what your job is as a budget committee, what our job is as administration, and we're going to take several slides and kind of describe to you what's in this 250, 60-some page document. We'll try to do that in one night, and we'll try to do it fairly quickly for you. Happy to take questions as we go along or save them for the end. Either way is fine. You have a copy of the slides with you at your station, so you can follow along there and make notes. But let's get started with kind of the administration's job and what our role is. As Dr. Balderas mentioned, we're charged with presenting the proposed budget to the Budget Committee. And again, using the district's equity lens, our budget supports students, and they're the center of the decisions we make moving forward as we develop our budget. So when you think about the equity lens, you think about our staffing allocation methodology, where that equity lens comes into play and how we build that staffing formula for our schools. Think about when the deputy superintendents are meeting and looking at budget requests as they filter up through departments, that equity lens is in front of those deputy superintendents as they review requests. And so they're using that lens as they look at making operational decisions and we build our budget. And then after the budget message tonight, we get to sit back and become your advisors. So we'll take your questions and help you work your way through where we need to be on a budget so that a week from Wednesday, you're ready to vote to approve the budget, send it on to the school board for budget adoption in June. So your job as a budget committee, what are your roles? What you're really doing technically is approving appropriations, tax rates, and amounts. So you are approving appropriations, and you're doing that kind of on a fund and function level. So we have certain technical rules that we follow as an organization set out by the Oregon Department of Education, and you're going to set limits. So for example, if it's the general fund and it's the instruction function and there's $300 million in there currently, and you approve that limit, that's $300 million that we can spend out of that function. We can't go over that without some maneuvering within legal limits to make changes to that. If we go beyond a certain number of changes to that appropriation level, then we come back to the school board and we talk to them about it. And if we go even further and beyond, I think the number's 10%, we reconvene the budget committee in total to say, all right, we need to bring you back together and talk to you about where we are. So what you're doing at a very high level is saying we're approving tax rates and we're approving the appropriations for you as a school district to spend during the year next year. And again, we do it by fund and function. We have expenditures at a very detailed level. When I compare us to others outside organizations, you might find a organization that has 120 or 150 account codes in their chart of accounts. We have thousands because we track in great level of detail. Our state wants to know a great level of detail of how we're spending money. So does our community. So we track in very great detail, but we don't necessarily budget, and we're not asking for your approval at those detailed level. The actions you take are subject to public meeting laws and simple majority rules. So similar to how you operate as a school board when you're watching the school board operate, it's a simple majority. And you can inquire about programs, but this kind of goes back to my previous statement. You don't make program decisions. So you don't get to say, this is my favorite program, and so I want to fund it in great and more robustly. And alternatively, you don't get to say, I don't like that program, I want to get rid of it. Those are more administration and board discussions that take place over a longer period of time. What we're asking you for, again, are those tax rates and amounts and setting those limits. So as you look at the slides tonight, I want you to think about where are we as a district? Are we headed in the right direction with our estimates as we build this budget? And you'll see that on the next slide. Your options for approval are you can approve the budget as it's proposed. You can increase the appropriation because you think we're going to get more money. This budget anticipates a $10.1 billion state school fund. If you think that's, we're going to get 11, you should say so. We don't think so. If you think we're going to get 9.5, that's your alternative, right? That we're going to get less than what we're estimating. We've seen that. We've seen some legislators have those discussions. We don't think that's going to happen. We've built a budget around that 10.1 because we think we're in the ballpark, and that's kind of where we want to be. We don't want to be too dramatic one way or the other. We think we're in the ballpark at 10.1. But those are your options, right? You approve it as it is. You think we get more money, we increase the appropriation. You think we'll get less, we'll decrease the appropriation. In terms of the presentation agenda tonight, now getting out of the roles and responsibilities and into the actual presentation, we'll talk about the components of the budget. We'll talk about our general fund, where the money comes from, how we spend it, and kind of our approach to budgeting. We'll talk about the significant budget modifications, so some of the highlights of what changes were made during the budget as we got it ready for next year. We'll go over the numbers because that's important. As Dr. Balderas mentioned, this kicking the can approach, it appears that's where we're at, and I think the numbers will weigh that out as you see those later. We'll talk a little bit about our reserves. Jessica will jump in and do a budget document overview to key you in on some key pages that you might want to take a look at that might be interesting. Then we'll talk about next steps. We'll get your questions and comments. Then we'll open it up for public comment. We've got some in writing that I think we've shared with you, as well as I think we've got some testimony, I think both on Zoom and in person tonight. So we'll take that. Then we'll come back. Jessica, I'll get up and leave for the public testimony so folks can take over here. Then we'll come back and we'll get a summary for the next meeting. What is it you want to know between now and then? Kind of our job, your job, and we'll start talking about how we work towards approval. And then we'll have superintendent's closing remarks, and then we'll adjourn. Okay, so big picture. We have 12 funds. Our all-fund budget is $1.5 billion. Our general fund is $666.3 million. Our current enrollment is 38,770, falling to 38,111 based on our projection. Current state school fund, $470 million. Next year's $480.9 million. So about a 11% or $11 million increase for next year in the state school fund, but still does not keep up with our costs. Next slide. When we talk about components of the budget, we get into that technical ODE reality of how they want us to report. You see our funds. We have the general fund. That funds our core operations. Special revenue funds, that's where you'll find grants, nutrition services, our one-time ESSER funds. The student investment account, that's where all those are. Debt service, that's where we pay our debt, and both pension bonds, our general obligation bonds, and any other debt we may have acquired. Capital projects, we passed capital construction bond last May, and so you'll see dollars in that fund as well. Enterprise fund, we don't have any internal service fund. We have an insurance reserve and workers' compensation fund. And then fiduciary funds, we don't have those either. But that's the big breakout, kind of the big lumps that we look at as we prepare to meet the ODE legal budget guidelines. There are those components again, just shown on a pie chart that shows you kind of the big picture. You see our general fund, certainly the largest we have, followed by our capital projects fund. And then below that in the green, kind of that brighter green, is our categorical for grants fund. That number is actually shrinking if you look at last year. Why is it shrinking? That's where ESSER was. So we've received a total over the last 3 years of about $72 million. As we go into next year, we've got about $22 million left to spend, and we'll show you how we're going to do that moving forward. How do we build the budget? Well, we start with revenue, right? We take a look at our state school fund. That's the driver, and you'll see that here in a minute. But we're paid on the average number of students that are enrolled during a school year, and we make that estimate. We provide that to ODE, and that's the basis for our state school fund. We also get additional weights for our students, depending on whether they're students in ESL, as ODE calls it, pregnant parenting programs, students on IEPs, which are capped at 11%. District poverty weighting also plays a factor. You'll see some of that yet later in the presentation, and students in foster care. In Beaverton, we're fortunate enough to have a local option levy to help sustain, and that's a teacher levy that we have. We buy teachers with that. It's based on property tax and was approved this last November at $1.25 per thousand. It's very difficult to explain. I know we get into that discussion, but it's levied at $1.25. Who it applies to and how much it applies to varies. It's done on a property by property basis to determine the gap, the Measure 50 gap, and we could spend a whole nother night on that, but I'll leave that at that. It'll generate about $40 million for our district. And finally, we have the beginning fund balance. That's the estimated difference between our resources and expenditures in the prior year, and you'll see that play out tonight as well. On the next slide, you'll see what that looks like. So for us, again, as Dr. Balderas mentioned, 89% of our money comes from the state school fund. So when you think about advocacy and maintaining program, it is key for us to advocate for that $10.3 billion. That's where most of our money comes from. It's dictated by the state in terms of what they feel is adequate for K-12 versus other programs. But again, 89%. So when we talk about where we need help, as a district, we need help at the state level to support our K-12 schools. Okay, how do we eat the elephant of building the district budget on the expenditure side? We start with our bargained agreements. That's our biggest commitments we make in this district. We're a heavily staff-focused district, and so we look to our bargaining agreements, and we look at cost of living adjustments. We look at step cost, cost of professional development days, and professional development individually for staff. We look at working conditions. Those have a cost to them for prep time. The more prep time within a school day that we might have for staff, that means those kids have to be supervised by someone. So it typically requires staffing. So we look at that. We look at benefits like health insurance primarily. That's the big one. And then we also, because we have kids in schools, we look at leaves, sick, personal leave and the like, and we've got to cover substitutes when folks are out of the schools. So all of those are costs, and that's what we use to begin to build our budget every year. So we take those, the next thing we look at is schools, and we have a staffing allocation methodology that we use in this district, elementary and secondary staffing numbers. And they're allocated based on the number of students and the demographics of those students, similar to the way we're funded by the state. The discretionary is the same, allocated based on number of students and demographics, using the SAM, and we also have the student investment account that helps supplement the SAM, and that's called out in the staffing as well. Currently, we have those one-time ESSER funds, and they'll continue to supplement us for this next year, and then that's it. They'll be expired and finished in September of 2024. Central departments, much more defined, much more support-based. So you think about in the business office, we might have a project we need to take on, or it might be, I know we'll discuss it tonight, a new ERP system. We'll have some costs related to that. If you look at what's going on in HR, they might have particular professional development they want to put on for substitutes or another group. So you'll see budgets like that. Those are pretty defined and pretty project-based and pretty outcome-based. They're not just allocated on a student weighting. So that's how we build the expenditure budget. And if you go to the next slide, you can see kind of what that looks like. So again, as I mentioned, we're a staff-intensive district, and salary and benefits are 88.2% of our budget. Dr. Balderas has mentioned that several times. Normally what you want to see in a school district is a number in the mid-80s in staff and salary and benefits. We're still in the high 80s. This has dropped about 1% though from the previous year. So we were a little over 89%. This drops us to 88.2%. If you look at the slide here, you can see that by the time we pay our people, pay our utilities, pay our charter schools, make some transfers, you get down to the bottom line and you look at everything else, all other expenditures are 6.3%. So by the time we get our folks paid, keep the lights on, and do those kinds of things, we have about 6% of our budget for everything else. So that means like copiers, paper, software, and the like. There's not a lot of, what this tells us is there's not a lot of discretionary money floating around in our budget by the time you add it all up. Next slide. Modifications to the budget. So we are planning for, this budget anticipates a deficit spending of about $8 million for next year. It gets much larger in year 2, and we'll look at that momentarily, but next year's deficit would be $8 million. Local option renewal funds, again, we talked about that earlier, of $40.5 million. Continued investment of an additional $1 million of middle school teachers for class size. We put that investment in last year. This year it maintains it again, but those are in ESSER funds. So as Dr. Balderas mentioned, those are going away. Something we need to deal with as we look beyond this coming year. We have summer school funding included. Summer school, the way we've set it up, we'll actually get 2 years of summer school out of. We'll get this next year's summer school and the following year of summer school before those ESSER funds expire. Those are in ESSER as well. This invests $1 million in classroom technology and classroom furniture. Those 2 items are not something we've had in the past. In other districts that I've been in and seen, we have a standard allocation for classroom technology, a standard allocation for classroom furniture, so that we're constantly reviewing and replacing that on a routine and annual basis so that we don't get behind. Especially in the classroom technology side, if you look around, if you're a substitute in this district, you might be surprised at what you might see going from classroom to classroom. We don't have a standard. What might be a standard in one classroom at one school doesn't look anything like it at another school. So this is our way to create a standard for classroom AV and technology that our kids can depend on, our staff, and our staff can depend on as well. Next slide. $2 million for the acquisition and initial implementation of a new enterprise resource planning software. So that's a really fancy term for our back-end finance, HR, accounting, and budget system. That's what that really is. The system we currently have was procured in 1999. We are headed on our last legs with this particular product, we think. So we have started the initial analysis to say, all right, where are we? What are the best business practices out there, and how can we use technology to leverage us moving forward? I think where we are currently with the product that we have is we're at a point where it just takes more people to run it. If we want more out of it, we need more people. That's not where we want to be. We want to be in a situation where we can leverage technology to help us make everybody's lives more efficient and drive dollars out of the district office and into the classroom. So we think this is a way to do that. Additional pre-K programs at 2 schools. You see that. Now we'll have a total of 15 programs. Expansion of dual language program at a school next year. That'll be a total of 9 schools. We also have resources to support adoption of balanced assessment and intervention systems. And this budget also includes a little over $10 million in CTE staffing, both in the general fund and in high school success. So significant increases or investments there. In terms of decreases, 90.4 positions. You see them listed there. 23.5 licensed positions that are unfilled. 24 licensed positions due to enrollment declines, 22 TOSA positions, 12.9 classified and 8 administrative positions. The way I've kind of described this is it's kind of a third model of 1/3 that are unfilled, 1/3 due to enrollment declines, and another third out of the district office. So we have some reductions there. We also had across-the-board central office reductions as directed by the superintendent of 3%. So those are included in there. And you'll also see, and we'll get into it a little later on a slide, where we've moved some dollars around. So Dr. Balderas mentioned it earlier, but integrated guidance is a process we were required to go through this winter. Started last fall, went through that process to prioritize those SIA dollars, high school success dollars, into specific areas and categories based on both the requirements of those granting sources and the needs voiced from our students, staff, and from our community as well. So it moved some dollars around. Shifts from ESSER to SIA and high school success included student success coaches, elementary academic coaches, high school options, school sports specialists, and credit recovery teachers. Okay, those were those big changes. On the funding and economic update, as we mentioned, $10.1 billion is our state school fund amount. That's $200 million more than what the governor and co-chairs have currently stated. We know we need 10.3. We know that's what we need, and we need to continue to advocate for that. We think 10.1 is being somewhat conservative. It is our hope that, similar to the last biennium, we can move the legislature a little bit as a collective force in K-12. If you recall, when well, when we were on Zoom 2 years ago, we were discussing a $9.1 billion state school fund. We needed 9.6. We budgeted at 9.3, and that's where it came in. It came in right on the button at 9.3. So we're hopeful we can get at least a 10.1. Would love to get to that 10.3 billion. Budget priorities were collected from staff and community, again, through the strategic plan, through the integrated guidance process, and through our budget listing and learning sessions. ESSER total projected remaining at June 30th of this year is 22.9 million, and again, that September 24 date is looming. And May 17th, when we come back to approve the budget next Wednesday, we will have heard what the state forecast was. That May 17th forecast is important because that's what the budget writers and legislature will actually approve when they adopt their budget in Salem. They're required to use that forecast. So hopefully there's some glimmers of hope in the forecast as well. Give those legislators a few more dollars to put towards K-12. Next slide, please. Okay, we'll get into the technical stuff now. State school fund history and projections. The bright red, the red is the Beaverton School District share of the state school fund, and the blue line there is the state school funding level. So if you look back to the 13-15 biennium, looking forward to the 15-17 biennium, and you just go forward, you see those increases of 8 and 9 and 13% over the prior biennia. And then you see the last biennium, that 3.3% increase. So our increase was not much at all in the last biennium. And then you see what's proposed at the 9.9, which is a 6.5% increase. And the way we think about that, think about how that works for us. That's over a 2-year period. All of these are over a 2-year period. So when you're looking at bargaining agreements where you have a 4% cost of living increase and steps and increases in healthcare costs, and you're in a time where you have great staff and you want to keep them, not only do you want to attract new staff, you want to retain the staff you have. We know that one of the things we need to compete is on pay and benefit package. So when you look at our where we are with our folks at paying a 4% cost of living increase and a step that's worth a couple of percent, it doesn't take us long to eat that whole 6.5% biennium increase. In fact, we can do it almost in year one. So when you look back at prior biennia, you get into those 9 and 10 and 12 and 13% increases. Those are more of what we would like to see and normally we would see in K-12, something that gets us through both years of the biennium. So not great news in terms of the 9.9, support for why we need the 10.3. Next slide. Here's the numbers. This is an interesting one. If you look at the green bar, that's our enrollment. You can see it's declining and has been declining since the high water year of 2019-2020. The green line next to that shows our special education number. That's kind of drifted down over time. Our ELL number started to rise and has drifted down a little bit. Students in poverty took a dip again during the pandemic. I think part of that was pandemic related, right? So a lot of money being sent out during the start of the pandemic actually caused our poverty to go down a little bit. And now it's bouncing back up again as we leave the time of those pandemic relief funds. And charter schools have stayed pretty flat. So that's a rough picture of what's going on with our enrollment as a district, and hopefully that helps you as we move forward. Here's the numbers, even more detailed. This is for those of you that have been on the budget committee for a while, you know this is the way we kind of show you what's going on. On our assumptions on the left, you can see we base it on 10.1 billion, and then for the coming biennium, and that 10.1 would increase by 6% out in that 25-26 year. So we've got an increase in the state school fund happening in a future biennia. You can see we've adjusted for enrollment moving forward. And once we get through next year, we've assumed flat moving out into 2025 to 2026. Whether or not that occur, I don't know. We'll have to watch that carefully. In terms of the numbers themselves, if you look at the top section, you'll see our resources. We have the beginning fund balance, what we call state controlled. Those state controlled dollars are both our state school fund amount, and it includes the local property taxes that go along with the state school fund. So again, those are all part of the state school fund for us. If we collect more than we say, we give that back. If we collect less than we say, the state sends us more. It ends up being a statewide zero-sum game So we include those local property tax collection, not the local option levy, but the local property taxes, just for K-12 operations. Beyond that, below that, you see locally controlled. Locally controlled dollars are the local option, as well as some investment income, some money we get directly from the ESD. Those are probably the three biggest pockets. We have some other stuff for, athletic fees and expenses that we collect, but they're not nearly as large. The big ones are the local option levy, the ESD revenue, and our investment income. And then down below that on the expenditure side, we just break it into salaries, benefits, and everything else, just for simplicity's sake. So if we look at the years and take a look at where we are, you can see our projection for 2022, 2023. You can see our total resources, our beginning fund balance, that won't change. That's the number of 109 million. We'll collect about 471 million in those state-controlled areas and about 62.5 million in local resources. That gives us a total of resources of about 643 million during the current year. You see where we're planning on expenditures, 290 in salaries, 107, just under 174 in benefits, and about 56 million in all other. Gives us a total of 519.6 million in expenditures with an ending fund balance of 124 million. That is the general fund. If you look down below that, the board created a long-term planning reserve some years ago. The way we're funding that currently is we tax 2% of our staff wages that are subject to PERS. We tax it at 2% and we dedicate those resources to this long-term planning fund. So there's about 15.5 million in there. So overall as a district, we plan to end this year at about 39.5 million. That's how you read this. Let's go forward to 2023-24. That's the budget you're looking at. That's where you can see we're planning to spend that $124 million ending fund balance down to about $116 million. That's that $8 million decline we were talking about. The long-term planning reserve goes up, so that helps offset part of it. But take a look at 24-25. That's the key year where you see that 115 million ending fund balance drop all the way to 90. So what's going on in that year? In that 24-25 year, what's happening is our enrollment decline is catching up with us. When we're funded on either the higher of the year that we're in or the immediate year prior. And so as we keep going down and declining enrollment, we keep getting paid on the prior year. So that's something to look out for, and that's where Dr. Balderas mentioned we'll have reductions. Spending down $25 million of that reserve in 1 year and then watching it grow again into 25-26, where that 90 drops all the way to 47, it becomes a snowball effect, right? So at some point, we'll have to do something to slow the pace of that erosion of the reserves, or you won't have anything left, and we'll have a very steep cliff that we'll be jumping off of, right? So what do we try to do every year? We try to make modest adjustments and then look up the next year and make some more adjustments, right? So this year we're spending down $8 million in reserves, knowing that in the future that only grows. Well, we'll take a look at it again next year and we'll make a recommendation on how deep we ought to go into those reserves and still sustain programs for kids. But this is a conversation that will be ongoing, and you need to hold us to account to keep looking forward out into the future and make those modest adjustments on a year-to-year basis. So that's what we see coming in terms of the numbers. If you look on the next slide, you'll see that graphically how that works. I know some people aren't numbers folks. They're more show me the graph. So if you look at this, you can see what's going on. It's the same numbers just presented in a line chart. Revenues are the blue, expenditures are the red. You see in 23-24, our projection is that the proposed budget says we'll go a little above. That's that 8 million. Then you see it grow to 25, and then you see it over 40 million the next year. So that's what we're trying to avoid over time. What we'll try to show you over the years is keeping that red and blue line closer together so that you have some level of adequate reserves, not necessarily excess, but some level of adequate reserves, and that we manage that over time and we don't end up in a scenario where we're making drastic reductions all at one time. Next slide. Reserves discussion. Okay, so 21-22, our fund balance was a little bit higher. I think we told you last year when we sat here it'd be about 106 million. It came in at 109. So we were close, but we if you might recall, we got a little more money in revenue and we spent a little less. So that helped our beginning fund balance for 2021-22, or coming into 22-23. Our 22-23 state school fund has been interesting. It's actually gone up. We actually got a pretty large surprise in March when they recalculated and did the second quarter ADM correction at the state level. What happened is we had, again, lower student counts statewide, which meant more dollars per student in the state school fund. So that more dollars per student translated into a larger amount that we received here in Beaverton School District. So we got about 9 million more in March than we were anticipating getting. So that was helpful to us in that there's disenrollment decline has come, and we must not be declining at the same rate as some others because we were a beneficiary, right? So that state school fund is only one big dollar amount. So you had districts on the other side of this that got a lot less in their March forecast. So that's what's going on right now. In terms of predicting the future, we'll have to see where that goes. But from the original estimate in May of 2022 until the most recent estimate we got in April of 2023, 12,500 students' weights have left the system out of about 660,000 weights. So, a couple of percent drop in terms of students statewide. So that's what's going on with State School Fund and why it's actually increased. And again, I think Beaverton was a beneficiary in that our enrollment didn't decline as steeply as some other parts of the state. The other thing in 2022, 2023 is we have had lower spending. Some of the positions that you see that we proposed reducing were just never filled. And part of that was that lower enrollment. When we started the school year, we had some staffing held back ready to go should these students show up, and they did not. So we'd never filled those positions during the year this year. So that's caused some underspending. We've also had staffing and sub shortages at the start of the year. I think, Susan would tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that's gotten better. I think it's shored up quite a bit from where we started the year. But you'll see that as another primary driver of why our expenditures are down this year compared to budget. So that's the reserves and kind of where they're at. Next slide. Budget considerations. So you'll get this electronically so you can see it as well, or at least a link to it so you can click on these links. But what did we do? How did we build this budget? What were you thinking about? Well, we were thinking about the district's strategic planning process. So we picked up some major themes out of that. That we could look to as we built our budget. Aligning for student success, the integrated guidance process, I mentioned that. There's a link to that so you can see all the details of what went into building that piece of the budget. And then our budget listening and learning video, we gave you some preliminary data at our budget 101 meeting in March. The final numbers are in and you can kind of see the input we received there. No shock and no surprise. Numbers stayed pretty much the same on a percentage basis. Class size is overwhelmingly the number one thing, priority in this district, but I'll let you look for yourselves. You can see kind of how the data played out there. Okay, let's talk about that SIA process a little bit. And this isn't an exhaustive list, and Jessica and I went back and forth with how to present this to you in the most meaningful way possible. But what you see here is the student investment account and just kind of the big picture pieces of it. And you'll see that kind of pinkish purplish color, the 2022-2023 SIA, that was the budget we had. And then if you look at SIA next to it in the blue, just to the right of that line, solid line, you'll see what was actually funded in there. And then from there you can see where it came from and kind of where we're at or where those funding sources were. So if you looked across and you said, let's pick social workers as an example, in the 22-23 SIA there was 38.8. In the 23-24 budget, we have 14.8 budgeted. We picked up 20.6 more out of ESSER for next year. So the total moving across is 35.4, if that makes sense. So what you saw were some things that were leaving the SIA, some things coming into the SIA, and what we're trying to show you here is just what went on with that. So if you looked at the college and career readiness counselors, we had 4.3 in 2022, 2023 in SIA, and those were actually picked up in 23-24 by the High School Success Fund. So we've got all these positions moving around, but this is to try to give you a picture of how that works for the SIA. The projected award for next year is 30.3 million. We're doing that because that's what ODE says it needs to be. I have some suspicions about that number, but we're going to leave it where it is for now. I think actually that number might go up a little bit, but it's not something we can really budget for or count for at this point. But the 30.3 we're using is based on ODE's estimate of what they think we'll get. I actually think we're going to get a little bit more. I can't say that for sure, Director Greenberg, but I just have a sense that if this acts like the state school fund, and the SIA is funded based on enrollment, and our enrollment did drop, but so did everybody else's, right? And so unless there's something going on with the cat tax that I don't know about, or it's not collecting enough, or the resources aren't there, I would expect this number to actually improve a little bit. But again, not something we can count on at this point in the budget process. So we built it on the 30.3. Next slide. High school success, this is a similar to the previous page. So high school success, you can see in that purple section what was funded in 22-23, the positions that were funded, and then kind of where those went. So if you look at something like flex credit teachers, you see 6 were included in 22-23, and we have 5 budgeted in the next year. If you look at flex credit assistant administrator, we had 1, and it was not funded in high school success in 23-24, but it was funded in ESSER. So this, again, is to try to show you, give you some indication of what's not funded in a certain spot anymore, what was picked up somewhere else, and then what wasn't picked up overall, if that makes any sense. Next slide. ESSER update, again, this is a critical one. You can see that we had over 100 positions in 22-23, and if you look across in 23-24, you can see where some movement occurred there. So if you look at the top one, student success coaches, we had 9.5 that were in ESSER in 22-23. Based on the priorities that came out of the integrated guidance and meeting with our administrators and what we heard, those actually got picked up in the SI and were funded there. So you can do that for all of these to kind of see what happened and where those numbers landed. So a lot of shuffling of staffing in terms of where they are, but that was caused by basically us following the rules we needed to, which was going through that integrated guidance process again and reprioritizing based on the information we had available this winter. So those are the changes there. Again, this is for background just to give you that big picture overview.
I
Next
have
slide.
one question
sure.
about those funds. So the things that are being picked up by ESSER, like the social workers here, are those people is there anybody on temporary contracts, or is everybody on a permanent contract?
So anything in ESSER we've labeled as temporary,
Okay,
and we've labeled it as such for just that reason.
okay, thank you.
Next slide. Okay. This is an interesting one and it's complicated, but we should take a minute and kind of look it over. If you look at what we have on the green bar, that's our enrollment and what's gone on with our enrollment. And then you have all those other bars listed there. So if you look at the darker blue line, the one on the top, that's our classroom teachers. Okay, so this is school-based staffing, not total district staffing, but this is to try to give you a picture of what staffing looks like in our schools. And you can see the number of teachers we have based on the enrollment. So you see the number of teachers we have compares pretty closely to what we had back in 2019, 2020, even though our enrollment's gone down. Okay, if you look at what you see in the red, you can see how those numbers have started up a little higher in terms of classified staff and have dropped and kind of leveled out over time. The one that makes an increase here is that purple line where you see student success coaches, counselors, academic coaches, social workers and the like. Those are in that purple line where you see it was fairly flat in those early years and then bumped up the last 3 years. Again, kind of fits with where we've been with the SIA and those mental health and wellness issues that we've seen and that we've wanted to address the past few years. And finally, that bottom line at the bottom, that's our administrator count, and it's been flat to down as you look across. So does that make sense in terms of what it looks like for how we staff our schools and how it compares to enrollment. So this is essentially something we're gonna have to get into, or we're gonna have to talk about in future years, right? Like, we have declining enrollment, we've held firm on a lot of staffing, some declines, but not much. We're gonna have to take a look at these numbers and see how we get into a more sustainable model over time, based on the numbers I shared with you earlier. But we thought this would be helpful. Next slide. Average class size, okay, so those are pretty similar. You can see middle's down a little and high school's down just a little. Elementary's, they're all down just a little, but fairly flat compared to prior years. That was intentional. The intention was not to increase class size this year. It was to try to maintain class size, and we've basically done that here. Again, just a big picture look for you. If I go to the high school and we look at the numbers there at 27.5, the high school teachers will tell me I'm crazy. That's not true. They don't have classes that size. That's because this is purely just taking the big number by the little number. It doesn't address plan time and those other issues. So when you look at actual class size in those schools, they would be a higher number, especially at secondary. Elementary is a little easier to calculate. Secondary gets a lot more complicated. But that's what they look like overall, and this is an apples-to-apples comparison. Next slide. Okay, we just mentioned it, class sizes budget at the same ratios as 22-23. Individual school staffing was affected by enrollment changes, so there are changes going on. We did adjust based on enrollment. You saw the numbers, both unfilled and reductions due to enrollment. We will continue our staffing and support with one-time ESSER funds for one more year. Overall, we'll deficit spend again, and that deficit will grow quickly if we don't make adjustments from year to year moving forward. Significant reserves, we talked about that. We reduced the general fund salaries and benefits by a percentage. And based on birth rates, lower enrollment will continue. Right, like there's nothing in the birth rate data for our statewide birth rates that would suggest that enrollment's going to suddenly improve. It is birth rates, especially in Washington County, are a high predictor of our kindergartens coming in 5 years later, and they're down, right? So, and you can just see it. You can see those large 12th grade classes or high school classes leaving the system, and much smaller kindergarten classes coming in. If I went to the high school's principals now and went to their meeting and said, we got to do something about the enrollment decline, they would say, what enrollment decline? They don't feel it, they don't see it, that the kids are still there. If we had that conversation in elementary, they'd say, yep, we see it. We know what's going on because we have those smaller class sizes coming in at elementary. Again, I think we've said it 4 times tonight. ESSER is going away in September 2024. And again, I think I've said it 3 times tonight. The state school fund's not keeping up. We need the legislature to fund us. I am very concerned that while we've had ESSER and while we have the SIA, which was designated for some specific purposes, our legislature is not funding our core operations of our school district, which is where most of our teachers are, most of our staffing is, and we've got to keep up in that area, or we will just continue to eat away at the core of our district. And that's difficult, right? That's difficult when you're not funding the core and the base of your operations. It's hard to build the rest of the house when the foundation is struggling. So that's something we'll need to keep our eye on moving forward. Next. All right, I'm going to be quiet.
Okay, we're going to go through the budget document. So we went over it in Budget 101, and I showed you some pictures. We're not really going to do that today, but we're going to point you to some of the updated page numbers for those pages. That is the image of your budget document. I see several of them around the room, so I know you have the right one. It is in 4 main sections: our executive summary, our organizational section, financial section, and the informational section. So in our executive summary, this is a liftable standalone document. So we actually do pull all 16 pages of it out, and we post it on our budget webpage separately so that you can read that instead of all 270 pages or whatever it is. There's a lot of stuff in there. And then what that does is gives you a high-level overview of the district and the budget and what went into it. We have our superintendent's budget message on page 3, and then a summary by fund on page 9. That one just kind of shows some history over the last 5 years, budget to budget. If you're looking at things like our grant fund, and our capital projects funds. You will see a lot of movement there with the addition of the student investment account, high school success, ESSER, and then it's starting to come down again. And for our capital projects fund, it was going down for a while, and now it is headed back up with the bond passing last spring. Page 13 is our benchmark data. I did add this one. I did not show this to you at Budget 101, and I wanted to note this one here because I did make a change to it this year. We normally use statewide data and compare our average class sizes and our financial information, spending per pupil for our instructional and support services functions. And we changed it, and the reason is that there are 197 districts in the state, and 80 of those have 1,000 students or less, and another 104 districts have less than 1,000 students. So to compare ourselves to a district that has 5 students, they have a really great class size because they have 1 teacher. So what we did was we changed it to using what we call the 10K districts. It's a group of financial leaders around this around the state who are the 13 largest school districts. And so we've used that, and we've changed those graphics on that page to compare to those districts instead. And also on the financial information, well, we have several of them on there. There are several that say that they are not available. And I'm hoping that that'll be ready by our adopted document. There's a shortage in auditors right now. We have several districts in the state who are not finished with their audits yet. So hopefully we will have that updated by the adopted budget. And then that last one is just our enrollment history and projections. The same graph that we show, big picture, our big number, including all our charters and outside placement students, some history and the projections for the next 4 years. In our organizational section, this talks about our district structure, our school board, our administrative staff. Generally, I don't share a lot here. I actually did add a couple of pages. Page 23, we started adding department pages. They're set up very similar to the way that we do our school one pages that are in our informational section. It's just by department, so they are in the same format. In every department is in the same format. We talk a lot about our budget process and our financial reporting description in here, and we have a multi-year investment summary. The organizational section as a whole, as well as the investment summary, will change as we move forward with our new strategic plan after that is approved by the school board. So we did remove quite a few things out of it, which is why this document is significantly smaller than it has been in the past, even though it's still almost 300 pages. We removed a lot of old strategic plan information. We put a little bit about a little draft information, some of those themes that are coming out, but we plan to update that for our adopted budget after the plan has been approved. And this is the only page I pulled out. And this is because I did not have this for you at Budget 101. And this is an example of what those department pages look like. So there's one for every central department. The one up here is the superintendent's office. It has, instead of enrollment information, it has staffing information, budget information, what percentage it is of the general fund, what the overall funds look like. So if you have funding in grants as well, or other places in the business office, we have the risk management, which is in the insurance reserve and workers' compensation fund. So we add that to our general fund. And then we talk a little bit about what's going on in our department, what are some of our challenges, our outcomes, and our goals. In our financial section, lots and lots of numbers, if numbers are your thing. I listed every fund overview there that talks about the revenue and expenditure trends and things that are happening in each individual fund. Our variance analysis is on page 60. It is smaller this year because we didn't have a whole lot of movement. It's budget to budget, not actual to budget, projections to budget. It is adopted budget to adopted budget. On page 73, we have our general fund budgeted positions where we break out our positions that we have budgeted by the bargaining unit and by the function. So you can see that, and that is compared budget to budget. We have debt information and some capital projects information. The capital projects fund, that is also another reason why the document is smaller this year. We removed a lot of the activity maps and things like that that were with the 2014 bond. And as we get more underway with the 2022 bond program, we'll be adding more information back as we have that. And our informational section, just a lot of information. So we start with our ratio teachers staffing by school. It shows you what comes out of those staffing ratios that are in the staffing allocation methodology. It will show you each individual school, what is in the general fund, and how much that school receives from the levy, how much they receive from SIA, and if they are a middle school, how much they receive from ESSER. And that is very detailed down to each individual school. Page 161, personnel resource allocations. There are a lot of changes on there. That is where the 90.4 positions that were listed earlier in the presentation are, and it's done by the bargaining unit as well. And we have detailed by school, enrollment history and projections. We have our staffing allocation methodology, our school summary pages, so the 1 page per school. And really important, our glossary and acronyms, page 263. I learned a couple extra ones this year as I put it together. So I feel like even though it's at the end, we should probably move that to the top of this list. And I am going to turn it back to you, Chair Edwards.
Thank you both Jessica and Michael for that great presentation. And we will open it up for questions from the Budget Committee. And I see a hand. Director Greenberg, if you'd like to.
Well, first of all, thank you both and your whole team for the comprehensive document and for the comprehensive overview of what our budget is for 2023, 2024. I'm focusing on the current service level at the state, projection at 10.1. I'm going to say I'm concerned about the state revenue report that's coming out. Was it May 16th?
Next, 17th, yeah,
Seven-
next Wednesday.
Oh,
Week from
17th.
Wednesday, the night we're going to approve the budget, yeah, and the election, yeah.
yeah, okay. That they're not, I love your optimism, but I'm, concerned that we're not going to hit that. And, what that's going to do in terms of potential cuts. And then so I guess that's more of a comment than, but my question is particularly about what you were talking about, like down the road a piece, what we're looking at. And I remember, a couple of years ago, Mike, you talking about PERS and the effect of it being kicked down the can, that being kicked down further. But I'm kind of thinking that we're looking at two things happening at the same time and affecting our budget, because PERS was kicked down the road, as well as we're looking at our number of students going down. And I'm wondering what, like, the potential impact to our budget could be even bigger because of PERS.
Thank you, Director Greenberg. We'll be keeping an eye on that. PERS, from a practical perspective, they've gotten better in terms of what they've used for what their assumed rate of return is on an annual basis. So that's gotten better. It used to be 8%. That was a number that was a little too big and kept biting us every couple of years. They brought that number down. The short-term interest rate environment is much better now than it was even a year ago. But where that goes and whether that holds and how that affects PERS allocations will be interesting. That's something we should share at a future board meeting to just get some overall direction on where PERS is headed in terms of potential changes moving forward. I know that they'll have a meeting next September where they will start talking about advisory rates again. That probably would be a good time to start having that discussion. I don't see any imminent large-scale increases in PERS on the horizon, but it's a challenge, right? It has been for years, and it will continue to be a challenge for us to fund it over time.
I recognize that the snake is kind of pushing out, and we're looking towards, no offense to anybody here that might be retiring in the next couple of years, but I had another question, or maybe it's more of a comment about, and of course it went out as you were talking, Mike, and that's my fault, but I can't remember what it is now, so it'll come back, I'm sure.
Any other comments or questions? Yeah, Jason?
On slide 18, you talked specifically about budget modifications. I'm wondering if you could expand or elaborate a little bit more on central office reductions of 3% or more. What does that pertain to?
So the 3% was a baseline number for for each individual department within the central office, and you had to hit that number. That was a non-negotiable, hit the 3%. So in the business office, it was primarily staff reduction. In other departments, it could be a combination of staff and things in terms of reduction. But they had to hit that number. The or more section of that had more to deal with our teaching and learning side, where you had not only this 3% reduction, but of a number of TOSA positions that were eliminated through the budget process.
So that if I can follow up on that, does that mean specifically when you look at like the central office sections within the budget proposal that should be showing in there?
Yes. Now, where you won't see it, Jason, is any cost of living increase or anything else that goes up, right? So what we gave them was their current budget allocation and said reduce it 3%.
Director Collette? Yeah.
Thanks for the thorough presentation, Mike. Much appreciated. My question is, you've emphasized before, is that we have ESSER funds that are going away next year, and I'm wondering, of the roughly $22 million in ESSER funds, how much of that is being spent on staffing and what that might affect in the, not this year's budget, but the out-year budget?
It's about half. I think it's 10.5 million. And so that's certainly, right, like that is kind of job one as we look towards, and I think we gave you folks had some questions. Did we get the responses? Okay. So if you've got those in your packets, I think that was one of the questions. And what we really need to do is about the time we're done putting this budget to bed, we'll be talking about how we get through the next year and how we deal with those one-time ESSER monies. And as Dr. Balderas mentioned, it's really going to be about prioritization. We have some really great programs that we built that are not going to be sustainable in the future. So we've got some tough decisions to make down the road.
And I have a second question.
Oh,
if
sorry.
You'll indulge me.
Go ahead.
Budget is built on 10.1 from the state. If we were to get 9.9 billion instead of 10.1, what would that difference look like in terms of dollars to our budget, and where might that money come from?
So when you think about it and you see those big numbers tossed around at the state level, for us, the 9.9 versus 10.1 is about $6.5 million in terms of decline. We would not, given the reserves that we have, we would not suggest altering the program in terms of the budget and the adoption of the budget. I can tell you that my recommendation to the superintendent would be that as we go through next year, we look at things like open positions that are occurring during the year. Do we need to spend on certain things? I mean, we will certainly be looking for ways to improve our financial position during the year next year. But generally speaking, it's worth about $6.5 million. What I've told Dr. Balderas and others that have asked me, every $100 million that you see in the state school fund is worth about $3 million a year for us. So when you think about that, you know, if we get from 10.1 to 10.3, that'd be $6 million more coming in terms of where we're at.
Thank you.
Director Paradis?
Yeah, so in the questions that we asked about ESSER, you listed the positions that are paid by that, and one of the areas that we've been supporting with ESSER is middle school, and there are multiple positions in middle schools that would be impacted by ESSER, and part of our strategic plan, that progress on standards was kind of based toward middle school supports, academic supports, and those are some of the positions that we have listed in ESSER. So I know we don't have the money, and I understand that we're spending down, but I'm highly concerned about the impacts to middle school differently than others because we're spending so many positions out of ESSER at this time. And then the social workers, all the social worker positions, and there's multiple other flex positions as flex numbers are going down as well that will be impacted. So we don't have a way to put them into our general fund currently, but just noting those impacts and how we would be using the strategic plan to address some of those pieces. As people said, class size followed by mental health and social emotional learning support, special education, and academic interventions as supports in the strategic planning. So that's going to be a huge puzzle, and thinking about how are we going to be transparent and how we process all that with our community. It's going to be important. More of a
That's our
comment
dilemma.
than a question.
Yeah, that's our dilemma.
Director Gowdy.
Thank you very much. This was, learning for me, and so much information you all have put together, and it's great. One of the things, we have been talking about state school funding, 11.8, 10.3, 10.1. Whatever happens, everything has an impact on the reserves. And there is a current minimum that we need to have. How much is that?
It's 5% in the general fund and 5% in the reserve fund. So if you remember back to the numbers we shared earlier, what you'll have is the reserve fund will hit that number in the next couple of years. So we'll be coming to the board probably in 2 years or a year, maybe a year and a half, and saying to the board, all right, you're about to hit your 5% financial reserve. What do you want to do? Do you want to stop? Do you want to take some of that and do something different with it? Do you want to continue to save for a rainy day? So you'll have options in front of you for that reserve that's a couple of years away.
So what is the impact of the reserve going down below 5%?
Just stability.
Stability.
Yeah.
Also, we would love to have 11.8 billion, but have the staff or looked at other ways of getting revenue other than the state school funding? Have we looked at other grants? Have we reached out to community? What are we thinking about as a district to make sure that we are not in a really bad situation where we are cutting teachers, or what can we do?
I think we always look towards other sources of funding. What we want to be careful of when we do that, Director Garg, is making sure that those are in alignment with our strategic plan and meeting the goals and objectives of the district. But there are areas where we can pick off and find grants that help supplement our program. I think with the numbers we're talking about in terms of shortfalls that we're projecting moving forward, we won't find a grant large enough to help us with that, right? Like these are big dollars, and but we're always on the lookout for looking for other folks who are willing to participate and help us out, and we'll continue to do that. I know one of the things is to make sure that we maintain our laser focus on the strategic plan, and that we're funding programs that get us towards that goal, as opposed to, so what you'll see sometimes are some projects and initiatives that are brought forward that may be great and wonderful, but they become distracting to us as an organization. Not that all of them do. Some of them, we're applying for grants all the time. We get them fairly routinely, but not in that large of a dollar amount, if that makes sense. Is that
We're really
help?
fortunate here that we have a local levy, a teacher's levy, we just recently passed, so to offset some class size. But as Mike mentioned, we're talking a $1.5 billion overall budget, and we are really, we right now have a structural deficit we need to fix. It's a structural deficit. We're basically overspending every month, and we're using our savings account in the future. Yeah.
Our total's up going to be about 138 million when we end this year.
Director Greenberg, can you turn on your mic, just so we can get it?
So I'm just wondering what the board
Sure.
said the percentage is, because I'm sure that everybody remembers.
So on our monthly financial report that we provide to the board every month, we've got 5% is the minimum. We're running about 18. I think next month you'll see about a 19% number. That's a fairly significant reserve. However, I would say it's very similar to the reserve at the state of Oregon. They have a reserve similar to ours in terms of, they're about 20%.
But you are saying that will come down, sorry, I just, continuation on that it will come down within a year and a half if the 9.9 passes, right?
If the 9.9 goes, that'll come down about 14 million next year. And then it only accelerates, again, due to that enrollment decline we're experiencing, it accelerates. And then if we don't do anything, it just really snowballs into very little reserve in 3 years.
Thank you.
Director Enigaya, and then Director Timchak.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mike and Jessica. I appreciate that you put the numbers for us so we don't have to go through the entire book. So thank you for that. Mike, I have a very quick question around the positions that we are decreasing. I see that we have 22.02 sub positions that will be decreased. I wanted to know if doesn't the levy pay for these positions?
No, the levy currently pays for classroom teachers, and that's what we've dedicated it to, and that's where we fund it for, is those individual classroom teachers. And as Dr. Balderas mentioned, it's, what is it, almost 290 for next year, somewhere in that range. So it really helps, but those are in those classroom numbers that we've shared with you.
Thank you very much.
So just a kind of a historical reminder, we haven't always had that in our policy of reserve. That was something that was just passed in the last 8 years. There's nothing that says a board has to keep it at 5. There are other districts that do 4, that do 3. I mean, but we learned when we had to lay off hundreds of teachers that we had to build up some reserve so that we had something, and this is exactly the reason, this gliding process. Remember, majority of the school districts in the state do not have a levy. We, as superintendent, we live every month, every year above what our core revenue is, because our community, our district values that, and to try to keep class size down, we value that, and so we have a levy, but most school districts live without that. So we are taking that levy money and still saying we need 10.3 to keep us, but we have that reserve, and it hasn't always been that way in this district. So it sounds like it's a lot of money, but then all you have to do is see what it costs us to operate every single day, and it goes real fast. But my question is, noticing on the pre-kindergarten number that you had, and we have a current budget of 2.6, and we have a proposed of 2.2, and I was just a little confused how it would go down that much when we're adding 2 schools.
I'll let you take it.
I have this down, and I will have to get back to you on that one.
Okay.
So I have to look into those numbers.
And then my last question is on the assessment and interventions that we were presented, and we know what that is. I did not see a monetary amount on that. So is that something that's still being worked out as far as what that cost is going to be?
I will get you the exact cost, but in my mind, it's about 600,000.
600,000. Okay, thank you.
Apologies for that.
Other comments from the Budget Committee?
I have a
Dr. Schultz?
question, Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. It's about the grant fund, and I know this is just my lack of understanding of funny money and how things move around, but there's a huge difference between 2019-20 and the amount of funds that are currently in the grant fund. Went from like 25 million to 144. So is that because of SIA or?
SIA and ESSER, I believe.
Okay, so they just kind of move things around and, all right.
And it'll head back down as ESSER goes away, as it was a significant chunk of that. SIA will continue, though. That's something we didn't have 3 or 4 years ago.
And just if you could speak to, as we're heading into maybe a permanent state, whatever's permanent, of declining enrollment, it still costs a certain amount of money to run a building or whatever. So do you see that the amount per student is it's going to have to increase, it seems like, at some point in order to keep any kind of reasonable service level in the schools?
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. Director Schultz, I think that's an issue that we have to deal with moving forward. And one of the even bigger complications is, just like when you're in I think my whole entire career, the sweet spot is like that 1.5% to 2% growth every year, where you're bringing in the resources for that, and you can fit some kids in some classrooms that are smaller, and you don't necessarily have to add a teacher for every 23 kids that come into the district. That same thing happens on the decline. As 23 kids leave, they don't leave in perfect packages where we can just eliminate a position. So it's kind of fits and starts as you lower your way down. So as we begin to lower our ratios for enrollment, you can see the number that comes out isn't nearly as efficient as you would think it would be because of things like number of schools we have, that number of just standard overhead that it takes to operate a school. Those are all considerations that this board will have to deal with down the road that I don't think has been talked about for 40 years as this district has simply continued to grow over time. So that's a new challenge for Beaverton that's headed our way.
Additional comments or questions from the committee? Jason?
I know there's no right answer, and it's more of a comment than a question. We talked about in the survey that classroom size is usually the number one thing that it's an easy thing to measure. And with that in mind, you talked about the reduction with there being 22 TOSAs involved. My understanding, I'm sure whatever the district decision is, because I know you said we can inquire about specific programs but not make program decisions. With that in mind, there's, a couple of programs out there in particular that I've seen the district in the last half decade to decade make huge investments in, and I've seen it in the classroom make huge strides. How do you, or how does the district go about measuring that value, that worth of that TOSA, in terms of how they're supporting maybe one group of teachers in a building versus all 612 teachers versus all 68? How does the district value that? Because when we look at the 22 TOSAs, we don't know on this piece of paper what their specifics are. They themselves may know or may not know their future and where their funding is or where it isn't. I'm just curious what that model looks like as we talk about what we invest in as a district, but how do we keep those afloat in this situation? So not that I have an answer, but it's an observation and a curiosity I have.
No, I appreciate that, and I think that that's our challenge as an administration moving forward is how do we keep our reductions as far away from the classroom as we possibly can and deal with reductions at the central level, and yet at the same time provide that level of support that we still need to have for those schools. And it's a tricky balance, right? That's the difficulty we have of as we reduce staffing at the central level, there is an impact on services to schools, and we know that. But at some point, or at least at this point, we have said we're going to keep cuts as far away from schools as possible, and that meant reducing at the district level.
The only other thing I was going to add to that is when you think about the investment, and again, it's kind of capital versus, what we can materially see versus what we can't. Thinking about investing in a program or investing in, I don't know, I guess a good analogy for me is we spend money to build a brand new kitchen, but we never bothered to figure out how to afford the cook. So I see the fear that we may be investing in programs years to come, but now there's no pilot. And I'm just wondering how we address that.
Yeah, that's the care we need to take, right? Is how do we continue to make those investments in schools that meet the goals and objectives of our strategic plan, and at the same time, we still have to run those services, right? We still have to
Mike,
provide.
Can I speak a little bit about that? So,
Sure.
So for me, it would be about alignment of programming. So looking at efficiency through alignment. So K-12, we need an assessment system that's K-12, and we need an intervention system that's K-12, differentiated by primary, intermediate grades, middle school, high school, for both math, reading, and some behavioral supports for our kids. We don't have that in the system right now. The system has been doing, we have pockets of excellence, but we don't have standardization. And not that we need the complete standardization, but we need something that we can count on, that our kids can depend on, because we have to differentiate by building, because our buildings look different across the system. So with that, though, are efficiencies. And that's what when you look at best practice systems, the models out there across the country, they have that. And that's what we're going to strive to do, is that's efficiency, and that supports our kids with the known structure. And that's where we're going to head in the future. So for us, it's that backbone of efficiency, and then how do we support that? Because without that, we can have any shiny object out there to help throw in and enhance kids. But again, without that backbone of intervention to get kids to read at math level by the end of third grade summer, and then work our tails off to keep those kids there. Whatever shiny object we throw at them, we still have those kids that are not succeeding. So that's our core purpose in education, is make sure we push everybody up.
Director Perez, I know you have a.
Yeah, I was, one area that our community's asked us to focus on is the mental health. But as I looked through I actually read this whole thing. I didn't see, there's not a place where that stands out, where our spending is on that. And I know that as we look at our strategic plan, I'm sure that will come out more. I don't know if it would come out in the teaching and learning section, or where in our budget we actually would track something like that. I don't know what numbers or like.
We can work on articulating that better for you. We know we have behavioral health and wellness teams, and we have a model that's out there, and it's funded in various locations. But that's something we could begin to bring together as something we want to measure. So when we think about the new strategic plan, we're going to look at those major initiatives that we want to undertake. And then we're going to look at those that we can also begin to measure and say, let's start measuring the effectiveness of these investments. So moving forward in a standard year, it'll get back to more of what we did prior to COVID, which is we make investments according to our strategic plan. We come back and we measure how effective those were, and we make decisions about future investment. So you'll start to see some of those significant investments moving. You have a spot?
I do. On page 261 in the informational section, we talk about our strategic investments, and there is a specific one for behavioral health and wellness teams.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think as we go through our strategic plan, like, I'm envisioning this starting to align more with those areas.
Precisely.
And, like you said, and us being able to make those connections. So thank you about that.
Director Greenberg.
Piggybacking on what Karen is speaking about, I thought I saw the money for social workers coming out of ESSER funds for the next year. But then for the future, as we're looking at things, and I know I've talked about this in the past, that I hope that we look at, working with other organizations out there to support social workers. I'd like to think that there's other dollars out there that is not actually being funded by education, that it's coming from the mental health pot, where it really, it should be coming from our state, and also our county. Because, it's our whole community that is, responsible.
Appreciate that.
Additional talking points for our state legislative staff. Yes. Any additional comments, questions from the Budget Committee or Budget Committee member online? Yes, Director Collette.
Just like a final comment, when I look at our ending fund reserves and I'm thinking about that, I think about what the Government Finance Officers Association's recommendation is, which is having 3 months of operating expenses on hand, right? You think of what if a major event happened in our community and you needed to keep the school district running for 3 months. And while these numbers look large here, 3 months of operating expenses is basically 25% of the budget. And you were saying earlier, this is like 20%. So we're not even making that mark, and we're going to have to cut into that in the future. And I just think that's worth noting along the way, that it's a big dollar amount, But actually, in terms of the security of this organization, this community, our students, everybody, we're eating into a number that's not even the minimum that's recommended. So just to kind of put it in perspective, I wanted to make sure to put that on the table as well.
I would just add to that, Director Collette, that when you look at us as an organization and we're talking about spending down 8 million of the reserves, and if 9.9 becomes a number, it becomes 14, and you don't see anybody pulling their hair out here at the budget table, right? Like, those reserves are there and we're able to do exactly what we're doing for this purpose, right? If we were running much leaner and much tighter than what we have the last few years, we would be in a position right now of making larger cuts to make sure we get to that 5%. And so what we're doing now is benefiting from those reserves growing over time and able to withstand a little bit of stormy weather. Can't withstand all of it. You see that over time, it becomes difficult, but we can make adjustments from year to year that are more incremental and more, like I always say, little ripples in the water, not the big rapids. We want to stay with those ripples. Thank you.
Any additional comments or questions?
And I will add, this is not your last opportunity. You get to ask more questions. You have the forms ready to go, and you can ask us whatever you like. I think I want to credit our budget team. They did a great job of getting responses out today. I was pleasantly surprised at how busy our office was all day today, getting the feedback you needed. We're happy to do that into the future. We kind of will like to look to, if you think a week from Wednesday, we'll be looking for budget approval. We want to give you everything you need and all the ammunition you need to be able to make a decision on that Wednesday. So if you have questions, please get them to us. If you need a meeting, my calendar is open. We'll make Jessica's calendar open. We'll meet before work, during work, after work, weekends, whatever you need. We are at your pleasure. As we mentioned, we're in an advisory capacity at this point, and we are here to give you what you need so you're ready to vote a week from Wednesday.
Thank you. And thank you for the 5 and some pages, that quick turnaround on the questions and answers that we had for you. But this isn't it. So we're going to move, if there are no other comments, we're going to move into public comment. And we do have some protocol for live testimony, but yes, Jessica.
We're going to go over, well, we're not really going to go over the written comment, but I want to point it out. It is in our slide deck. We received 9 written public comments, and all 9 of them are in the slides. We're not going to read all of them to you. They're there. This slide deck will be shared with you. And in blue, after each topic, there is a district response that we've provided. 7 of these were on the Rachel Carson program. 1 is about high school start times, and the last topic is about class size. So we will be sharing this presentation out with you so that you can read those comments and the district response.
Great, thank you. So I believe we are going to start with our live Zoom testimony, but before we do, want to read through the protocol for live testimony. The Budget Committee has set aside time for live public comments. Please plan to limit comments to 2 minutes. The Budget Committee will not hear charges or complaints against any district employee. District employees and board members cannot be named specifically during testimony. If a commenter names a staff or board member once, they'll be asked to refrain from doing so again. If they name a staff or board members again, their testimony will be ended. And Budget Committee members will listen to the commenter only. Budget Committee members will not comment or ask questions. So with that, we will move, I believe, into our live Zoom testimony. Do we have Larissa Mason or Larissa Masson on the line?
Yes, Larissa Masson.
Hello, Larissa. Thanks for joining us tonight. And
Thank you.
we'll let you start your 2 minutes when you're ready to begin.
Thank you. My name is Larissa Masson, and I am a teacher in the Rachel Carson program, the option program. I'm also a parent of 2 BSD students and a community member. And I'm here to ask for the continued support of the Rachel Carson Options Program. In the current proposed budget, the Rachel Carson Program Facilitator Stipend, which is 0.4 FTE, has been eliminated. And while my colleagues will soon share a bit more about other aspects of our program with you, and the critical role of this facilitator position, I'd like to share a bit about the heart of our environmental science program, which is creating a multi-age community where all students know that they belong. Our facilitators play an essential role in making sure that the fifth graders from across the district have multiple avenues to learn about our program. In addition to the open houses that we have offered, we have interpreter services. With those, our facilitators contact each Title I elementary school in the district and set up individual classroom presentations where students can meet with the Rachel Carson facilitators and ask questions in person. In addition, the facilitators coordinate fifth grade shadowing experiences where interested students can visit our classrooms and they can shadow a seventh grader for a day to learn more about the program. Once accepted, the RC facilitators are the main point of contact for the incoming fifth graders and their families. They attend fifth grade transition meetings for students with IEPs. They make sure that all accommodations are in place before the students begin school. They work with families to make sure that the students have the rain gear and rubber boots, et cetera, necessary for our site visit outings. And they host a summer leadership training for the eighth graders so that they're ready to support and mentor our youngest learners. Through solid outreach, ongoing family support, and leadership training, our facilitators ensure that all of our students belong. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Messam, for being here this evening and your testimony. Next testimony, live Zoom testimony, is Kendall Gibson. Is Kendall on the line?
Hello, everyone. Thank you.
Good evening. And you can begin your 2 minutes when you're ready.
All right. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Kendall Gibson, and I teach social studies at the Rachel Carson Environmental Science Program. I am also a parent of two students in the district as well. I've taught in the district since 2001 and with Rachel Carson since 2006. I'm here to speak to you about restoring funding for the Rachel Carson 0.4 FTE facilitator position, specifically as it relates to maintaining our long-standing and varied community partnerships, including partnerships with the Oregon Ag Link, Oregon Food Bank, and the Solid Eco. These partnerships exist and succeed because of our continuity and the year-round commitment of the RC staff and our program facilitators. Since the RC program started in 2004, 4 separate several-acre natural areas have been restored to their native environment as part of our work with local environmental organizations. These projects involve multi-year commitments that include surveying an area, removing invasive and non-native plants, as well as planting and caring for native plants. Once an area has been planted completely, usually after several years, the site is left as a natural habitat for plants and animals. ECO, our current restoration partner, often refers to Rachel Carson as the model program for which to work. RC has been at the current restoration site for 5 years, and the plan is to continue there for 2 more. In addition, Rachel Carson's staff, families, and volunteers joined together with the Oregon Food Bank to create a learning garden, which provides over 5,000 pounds of fresh food for people in our community on an annual basis. Through close collaboration and communication, the garden was up and running within a period of 10 months, and it continues to provide food to those experiencing food insecurity. Another successful long-term partnership with Rachel Carson includes our work with the Ag Link organization and the Adopt a Farmer program. Every year, our students visit Paramine Farm in Jervis, Oregon to learn about agriculture through hands-on experiences and relationships with the farmers. Visits to the farm include lessons on irrigation, planting,
Mr. Gibson, I'm sorry to interrupt. Your 2 minutes are up.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us tonight for your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have a few folks here that are present tonight, I believe, as well. So we invite you up to the microphone. And I believe Shaw Fenton, if I'm pronouncing your name right. And on deck, if you want to come up as well, Deborah Herford. Yes, actually, they are on. You have a green light on your microphone, so you'll be good. And whenever you want to begin is fine for us. If you'll state your name too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I will. Hi. My name is Shay Fenton, and I am here today to advocate for our behavior health and wellness supports. I am a school counselor for our district, and my co-counselor and I are tasked with providing a comprehensive school counseling program for the more than 760 students we serve. Next year, with our school projections at just over 700, the district has eliminated one of us. To be clear, that leaves one school counselor to provide a comprehensive school counseling program to more than 700 students, despite ASCA's recommendation of a 1 to 250 student ratio. The caseload puts our students at risk, and I will need to rely on my BH&W colleagues, BH&W leadership and COSA support to meet students' needs. I learned today that much of that support has been cut. This month is National Mental Health Awareness Month. Concerns about children's mental health has been ongoing national conversation, one exacerbated by a pandemic that has yet to end, extreme gun violence in our schools and public spaces, the trauma of violence against Black and brown bodies, and inadequate community mental health supports to address significant increases in childhood anxiety and depression. Many challenges outside of our control as a district, but impacting our students' ability to engage fully in their learning nonetheless. Students are struggling to navigate conflict as they've watched and listened to our ill-modeled national political and ideological discourse. Our district was committed to increasing protective factors for our students, harnessing what we have control of just as we teach them to do, by providing a team of people trained to listen, support, and guide students, their families, and respond to the crisis needs of our students. Drastically reducing or eliminating those protective factors is a grave mistake that will undoubtedly cause harm to those we serve and support. I urge you to commit to our students' mental health and well-being. Now is not the time to reduce or eliminate necessary supports. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fent, for being here and for your testimony. And Deborah.
My name is Deborah Herford, and I'm a teacher in the Rachel Carson program and a parent of 2 BSD elementary students. And I am here with great respect for the complexities of the budgeting process to ask for the continued support of the Rachel Carson Options Program, specifically as it relates to the facilitator position. While the elimination of the facilitator stipend may make sense on paper, the unintended practical implications are far-reaching and directly impact the classroom experience. We invite you to learn a bit more about our program and how the facilitator position is essential to its continued success, both in the short and long term. As you are likely aware, Rachel Carson has been part of the Beaverton School District since its founding in 2004. During that time, we have created a unique middle school experience where a wide range of students successfully navigate their middle school years. In a typical year, applications are 3 times greater than available openings, and we make every effort to attract a diverse group of students from all across the district. We are a specialized program centered around service learning and environmental science. Approximately 3 times per month, students learn and work at locations ranging from Commonwealth Park to our local wetland restoration site. No matter the location, these site-based learning experiences require hours of planning, implementation, and follow-up on the part of our facilitators. Focused lesson plans are designed to ensure that these outings are not typical field trips, but instead opportunities for both learning and service to our community. Facilitators make sure trips are scheduled, transportation is arranged, communication is sent out to families, and all proper paperwork is completed. Please help us to continue our work to fulfill the BSD promise where all students belong, believe, and achieve. Thank you for your consideration of our sincere request to restore funding for the Rachel Carson stipend.
Thank you, Ms. Herford. And up next, the last 2 of our public testimony tonight, Tammy Schrader and Rebecca Hall, you will be on deck, but both of you can come on up. You go first. Yes.
Hi, my name is Tammy Schrader, and I am also a teacher at the Rachel Carson program. And Rachel Carson program is a middle school option program that was started in 2004. It's been a successful program that has educated around 1,200 students. It has had the ability to draw students from not only around the district, but also bringing students back to the Beaverton School District from area private schools and online schools. With our declining enrollment numbers in BSD, this program can continue to draw students back to our district. Rachel Carson Environmental Program needs to maintain its current funding for a part-time, 0.4 facilitator that is being cut for next year. The facilitator position at Rachel Carson is fundamental to the success of our program. The facilitator works with community partners and transportation to arrange 82 day trips, all paid for by fundraising, and 2 multi-day trips for 180 students each year. These trips are essential to many facets of our program, bringing classroom learning into real life, service learning, community building, mentoring, and leadership, just to name a few. The facilitator is the connection families have to learn more information about the program. The facilitator organizes and presents at open houses, scheduling shadows for almost 200 fifth graders, works with the district office to fill 64 sixth grade openings each year, typically receiving about 150 to 180 applications for those 64 spots, organizes second consideration for about 75 fifth graders, and communicating with the district office and the school office to keep our enrollment numbers at 180, or about 30 students per class. Our facilitators are committed to the work involved with maintaining a successful middle school options program. We have been with the program since its inception and grew the program to its current size of 180 students. We are committed to creating a sense of belonging and community for all students. We love what we do. We continue to serve our students.
Thank you, Ms. Schrader. Thank you.
Am I on?
Whenever you're ready.
My name is Rebecca Hall. I'm also a teacher at Rachel Carson. As you know, climate change is one of the most important topics of our time. Leading scientists are in agreement that we need to stop scaring people into action for climate change and instead give them hope. They believe that providing hope is so important because then people will believe the work they do can stop the effects of worsening climate change. It is important that people, including our youth, believe that they can affect change in their local communities and beyond. Beaverton School District has a program that gives students hope. It gives young people, middle school students, the knowledge and skills to achieve their goals. Not only are they successful, but many go on to study environmental science in high school and in college. These students believe in their ability to change the world. They spent 3 years changing the world while participating in activities as a part of the Rachel Carson program, restoring habitat over several years, organizing food drives, learning from local farmers and seed banks, and learning to be present with nature to connect to the natural world. These experiences and opportunities are provided in part due to this facilitator position the district has funded. Without the facilitator position, the activities will be greatly reduced. Activities that make students believe they can affect change. Activities that create a community where every student feels like they belong, and activities that make it so that every child can achieve. I hope the Beaverton School District can be proud of and celebrate the work of and success of the Rachel Carson program and not cut this funding. Come see the program, talk to students, go on a trip with us. Ask students if they can change the world, if they believe they can make the world a better place by mitigating the effects of climate change and knowing how to be a positive, contributing member of society. I guarantee their answer will be yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. And thank you, all of our educators in the room, for your testimony tonight. It's very powerful hearing from you. Thank you for being here. Little shift in our agenda now to a summary for our next meeting, which we have been informed will be May 17th, a very important day. Right after Election Day, when the state budget forecast comes out, all
Yep.
that good stuff.
Yep, it'll be a busy day. It'll eventfully.
We have a lot to look forward
Yep.
to.
Yep, thank you for that. So we'll just summarize kind of where we are on next steps, and I'll turn it over to Jessica.
So for our May 17th meeting, actually, before we do that, I do want to respond to a question that Director Timchuk had earlier about pre-K, where the cost to add 2 programs is about $500,000. And I am looking at the general fund on page 76, where you do see that decrease in that pre-K function. If you add page 114 in the grant fund, there is an increase there, and the total between the two is an increase of $500,000. So it's just a shift of funding source, okay? As we are looking at our May 17th meeting, the things that we will do on that meeting, we will approve the minutes from this meeting. We will bring back any answers to any questions that you have for us at that point from this meeting. Now that we have answered the pre-K question, the only one I have is to put a dollar amount to the assessment and intervention system, unless I am missing one. If I am missing one, please let me know so I can add that to our list. Otherwise, we also will be sharing out, when we share our slide decks, we will give you a PDF of the copies of comments that you have in front of you, and we will reshare the link for submitting questions, if you have more questions to submit to us. For us to be able to prepare those responses for you for the 17th, we're asking that those are all submitted by 8 a.m. on Monday, the 15th. So we can get those questions in, and we will have more time for committee discussion, questions, comments, and finally, we will hopefully be approving our budget and our tax levies.
That's all we got.
Okay, can we go back to that slide real quick? The first bullet, I think we all can continue to advocate for this 10.3 billion state school fund, whether you're part of administration or sitting here as a committee member or a community member, for us to be sharing these thoughts and with our legislators, very important to do. So thank you, Jessica and Michael. And last but not least, we have some closing remarks from Dr. Borderas.
And I'll be quick, and I appreciate the comments tonight. Again, that continues to just drive our advocacy efforts. You know, I know we're going to be voting on this next week, but our continued advocacy down in Salem, and we're on weekly calls with our elected officials or lobbyists as well. But every program is essential for our kids as we know it right now. I think we have to be really, really intentional as we continue to build programs, as has been stated by the Budget Committee, to ensure that they're sustainable. And also reflect back on our current programming, make sure that we use an equity lens. I know that's been talked about often in terms of, but the equity lens just can't be just bullet points that we review. It has to be actually something that we dig a little bit deeper on as a Budget Committee, maybe even as a board later on, in terms of what impact does that have across our system. We have declining enrollment, we have ESSER dollars leaving, and budgets are moral documents. Budgets are moral documents. What we fund is what we believe, but with less dollars, it's difficult. It's hard because reductions, as Mike stated, we're almost 90% people. So any reduction is people. That's what makes it so hard. And as a superintendent, these are really difficult decisions. And as a Budget Committee, you'll make a difficult decision next week as well. But again, we do everything we can to try and do what we can for all our kids across all 54 campuses. 38,000 and change that we have now. We used to have 40, and we'll continue to do so. So guarantee that we'll continue to do what we can with the resources we do have. And I appreciate the staff, all the work that you did in answering questions today. And again, making yourselves available for the Budget Committee for future questions. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And with no further ado, then we will adjourn tonight's meeting, 8:27, 3 minutes to spare. And we'll see everyone again next week on May 17th.